recording now. All yours.
Okay, I have to check something here on my computer. I can't read. Okay, continue. I just got the message that we're on tape. And so I'm Franz Bone, and I will be taking you a tour through Graphite land. And so what we'll be doing, we're going to look at, we're going to have a little side trip on how pencils are made, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the just materials, like what are pencils made out of, what are the different grades of the pencils, and we'll try doing a couple little experiments. And then kind of closer to the end, then we'll start doing some drawings and play around and kind of see what you guys can come up with. So first off, pencils, have been around for quite some time, and you always hear about the lead in a pencil. Well, it's not lead, it's actually graphite. And I actually have a block of graphite here. So if we can go to overhead now. This is graphite, and it's mined, like coal or anything else. There are different grades of the graphite. So I'm going to be working with the Faber-Castell pencils, and they're, just a really excellent premium grade pencil. So they look for the best graphite. And then this is clay. And so you've got clay and graphite. And if you ever notice, like in a pencil, look at one of our jumbo pencils here, and it says it's a 6B. So that's a fairly soft pencil, because in the world of pencils, if you have an H that follows a number, then that is going to be a hard lead, and the B's are reserved for the softer leads. And then the higher the number, the more extreme it gets, either in terms of the hardness or the softness. So a 6H pencil is about as hard as you'll get. And then an 8B pencil is generally the softest. And then so there are all the gradations in between. And what determines whether something is a soft pencil or a hard pencil is the mix between the proportion of graphite to the clay. So if you have a very soft pencil, then you have a much higher percentage of graphite than you do to the clay. And if you have a very hard pencil, then it's the reverse of that. So what they do is they grind up both the graphite and the clay, and they kind of make a slurry out of it. And they mix it together. So it's kind of like pasty, and then they extrude it. And so you get the leads. So here is a lead without the wood casing. All right. Now, they've got slats of California redwood for the Faber-Castell pencils. And these are actually the trees. They tried growing them in Germany, where Faber-Castell is headquartered, and the trees just wouldn't grow. So they get all their wood from California, and they plane it down into these blanks and then ship them off to Germany. Let me get the next little panel out. And so then they machine it. I don't know if you can see the grooves, but maybe I can hold it up a little bit close. There we go. So you can see that it's the slat, but then they have very meticulously and precisely put grooves in it. Maybe this way you can kind of see what the grooves look like. So then once they have that, then whichever type of pencil it is, they put these pencil leads inside the grooves, and then they take another blank and they put it on top. And so you can kind of start getting an idea of how the pencil then is assembled. So here is what it looks like when, you can look at the end of it there. I'm trying to second guess where that is. There we go. So you see the leads, and they're encased in those two. It's like a sandwich. All right. And then the next step is to start to form them into a pencil. So what they do is they run it through their machines, and it forms this part of the pencil, and it's still flat on the other. So then once this is done, then it is flipped, and both sides are done, and you can kind of see the space that's in between the pencils there. So when that's finished, then they have a bunch of these blanks. And so they're this really excellent, real straight grain wood with the lead. And then it's painted. And then the finishing touch is it's branded. It's branded, and then you know, with all the information, and then it'll tell you this is a particular one is a B pencil, and they finish the ends and sharpen it. So when you get a set of the pencils, or if you get a box of the pencils, they're already sharpened, so that kind of saves some time, especially if you get a lot of pencils. So that's, I mean, that's just how the pencil is made, and Faber-Castell has been branding and making pencils since 1761. So they are experts at making these things. And so now you have a little information about the hardness and softness of pencils. Let me just get this out of the way. I'm going to disappear for a second, and then we'll get to how all that stuff works. Now, another thing to mention in the process of doing this is the paper is really kind of an important element of drawing or any other, you know, anything that is produced on the paper. It's kind of, a lot of times people don't think too much about it, but it's as critical as materials that you're using on top of it. So you want to get to optimize what you're doing. You want to make sure that you get some paper that would be appropriate to what you're trying to do. Now, of course, you know, you can make marks on anything. You know that if you just have a regular pencil and you've got, you know, like a real thin sheet of, you know, a receipt from a restaurant or something, you can write on it. But if you want to do a drawing and you're putting a lot of effort into it, it's best to get appropriate paper. So I try to get a slightly heavier paper. This is a Stonehenge white made by Legion Paper, and it's a 250 gram per square meter. You know, so it's a good weight paper, and it has a slight tooth to it. And if you have a tooth to the paper, then it allows you to kind of develop some textures. You could also use a very smooth paper if you like, but this has kind of just a nice neutral surface. And it's a nice heavier paper. And the other thing, if you're really putting a lot of effort into your work, you also want to make sure that you get an acid-free paper or a pH neutral, because you know, things like newsprint or things that are paper that have acid over a period of year will turn brown and will actually kind of destroy itself. It kind of destroys itself from all the chemicals and the acidity that's within. So if you're putting all that time into your drawing, you want to make sure it's going to last. So if nothing else, I mean, there are plenty of really good papers out there. You can get them in the form of, you know, nice paper books that are either bound or spiraled, or you can buy single sheets. But you want a slightly heavier piece of paper. I mean, you can even kind of maybe hear that sound that when I flick the paper, it makes a bit of noise. So go with that. All right, now I'm going to, this is a set of ranging from 2H to 8B pencils. And, you know, they all look the same. They're all sharpened. You know, they have this nice look to them, but they are different. And so at this point, if you have your paper and pencil, then you can kind of join me with doing this. Now, what I'm going to do is take the hardest pencil that I have, which is a 2H. And as I said, you know, they go to 6H, but I have found the 2H is generally as hard as I ever need to get. Now,
we have a question about the paper.
Yes.
So is there a specific pound of paper that you're using, and could you use Bristol paper for this exercise?
Yeah, yes, you could. Like I said, that the main thing is that you want a paper that is acid-free. This happens to be 100% cotton fiber, which I particularly like. It's very resilient and takes the materials, not only the graphite, but pastel and things very nicely. But like a Bristol paper is fine. A lot of papers, you might hear about a hot press or a cold press. The hot press, when they finish the paper off, they hit it with a real hot platen, and that gives you a really smooth surface. In fact, I've got a pad that we're going to use for some pencils at a certain point. It's kind of hard, you know, in this light with the cameras and stuff, but if you would actually look at this and kind of run your hand over it, you can kind of feel that there's just a little bit of a texture to it. And I find that that is best when I'm working with the graphite. But yeah, I mean, that you could get, you know, like there are a lot of paper companies, there are a lot of good papers that you can use that either come like this in a pad, or you could get some that are like spiral bound. And as you work and start getting a sense for what you want to do, you know, you'll pick your favorite papers. I personally like this paper a lot because it also is good for pastel, and it's also good for printmaking, and I kind of do all those things. So if I get this paper, then I'm kind of set for just about anything I want to do. But I know that it's sturdy enough, and it'll take erasing, it'll take heavy layers, soft layers, the texture will work out nicely. So when you draw, if I'm drawing a line, I will hold it more like this. If I am developing a tone, I'm more apt to hold it near the end instead of hunching up like I'm going to write somebody a letter. And that is the way that you kind of deposit, you know, whether you're doing a line, you're probably going to want something that is a little heavier, a little more distinct. And if you're building up tone, you're going to do that a little more gradually. And the way that you hold the pencil is going to make a big difference. Now, like as I mentioned, this is a 2H pencil. And if I want to sketch, and that's the other thing, are you sketching? Are you drawing? Are you sketching before you draw? You know, got to kind of think about what the whole process and the end is. But so if I want to sketch something or lay it out before I really kind of go into doing the drawing or something, I'll use very light pressure. And again, you can see that I'm more at the end of the pencil doing my sketch marks, because I don't want to really put a whole lot of pressure on it, because I just want to make light little lines that are going to help guide me in what I want to do. I'll make the lines dark enough I can see it. But then this way, it makes it really easy to erase that lines if I've made a mistake. Or if I decided, now, you know what, I'm going to do something completely different. So I hardly have to use any pressure with my eraser. And that's another thing too. We'll get into it a little bit. You can get a vinyl eraser or a kneaded eraser. But now I can go back and maybe I can kind of change that. Now, how many times have you seen like a film noir movie where they're trying to figure out what the note was, or what is the address, or what's the name of the person on this notepad by the phone? And the top part has been taken off, but they notice there's an impression, and so they kind of do a rubbing. Well, you want to keep that in mind with your drawing. So if I take a really hard pencil and I make a really deep line, and I decide, oh, I don't want to do that, I might have a hard time erasing it, just because I've really kind of scored the paper and really pushed that graphite in there. But if I decide I'm going to put a tone over that, I mean, I can even hear it. I can hear my pencil, and you can see the way that it's really, I have a very nice even tone, but then I've got this line that's kind of coming through there, and that's because I scored the paper and I've destroyed the surface of the paper. And so I'm trying to build up this real subtle transition in tone, and because I was too heavy with my line work, then it's going to show up. So whenever you're drawing the lines, especially with the hard pencils in sketching, you just got to make sure that you only use enough pressure, and instead of acting like you write somebody's letter, go back, you know, a little farther on the barrel, and then that will help you do the sketching. Now let's talk a little bit about the tone. So this is a 2H, and we're going to do like a grayscale. So kind of a figure that, you know, I've got about, well, we won't do all of them. I've got about 8 pencils, but we'll do, you know, 3 or 4 of them. But here's the 2H. So I can, again, I hold the pencil near the end of the pencil rather than writing it like I'm going to do a letter. And so I'm starting to get a nice tone. And if I want it to get darker, I just go over it again. So I keep on going over it and over it and over it. And the detail probably doesn't really show, but I can see the little white specks coming through that are the paper. So if you kind of think about, you know, the paper, you've got the peaks and valleys. So this is, I don't know if you can see that. Let me get one of my soft pencils here. Okay, so, all right. So you've got the peaks here. And so what you're doing is you're layering, you're putting the graphite on the top of the peaks. And then you have a little bit of white from in between those peaks that is shining through. So it creates this really nice texture. And so that as I'm doing that here, it's not, the texture isn't going to show up quite as much. And again, you know, this is not like a real heavily textured paper like watercolor, but I can keep on building that up and building that up. But at a certain point, unless I really start pressing too hard, that will then kind of mush all that stuff together, I can only get it so dark with, excuse me, a 2H pencil. So I might then hop back to, if I want it to be a little bit darker, let's bump up to an HB pencil. So, you know, I have a 2B, I mean a 2H, an H, then I've got a fine, an F, or like a, you know, let's go to the F. So we have 2H, we have an H, but we're going to skip that one, and we're going to go to the F. So again, I'm going to hold it near the back, and already I'm kind of about the same value as I had with the 2H with, and so I'll go over it again, and I see the texture of the paper coming through, and I'll put another layer down. So you can start developing the tonality of your shapes and what you're drawing by layering and layering and layering. Okay, so it's subtle, but there's, you know, we have this value and it's a little bit darker. So let's move up to a 2B. Now we're starting to get into the softer, juicier pencils. So we'll just mark the 2B. And whatever range pencils, if you only have one pencil, then maybe practice just seeing how many tones you can get out of that. And so this one, I mean, I just am barely pressing down, and you can see that with just one layering of this, it's already a little bit darker. And I think that it's going to start showing up that texture a little bit more. When we get a couple more of these squares done, I'll hold it up a little bit closer to the camera so you can start seeing that texture. Okay, so there's the 2B, line from Shakespeare, to be or not to be. Okay, 4B. And again, right off the first attempt here, I'll go over it a couple of times so you can see how it's progressively getting darker and darker and darker with the softer. Okay, so this is 4B. Okay, we'll go to the 6B. Let me sharpen this. And that's another thing. When you're using really good drawing pencils, you want to make sure that you don't use an office pencil sharpener, whether it's the old-fashioned crank ones or whether it's a motorized one. Those will just eat these things up. And what happens too is that the leads that are in a drawing pencil are considerably safer than the lead that they have in an office pencil. So if you look at the angle that is put on a pencil lead with an office pencil, it's very sharp. You know, it's kind of the distance between the base of it and the height of it, it's much longer than it is wide. When you use a hand sharpener, you know, think of it like kind of a golf stubby pencil. It still gives you a point. I'll put the lead here. It still gives you a point, but it's much broader. And so that gives it a lot more strength. So if you take a soft pencil and get it to be a real sharp point, first thing that's going to happen when you go to draw, the point's going to break and go across the room and put somebody's eye out. Yeah, it's very frustrating to have to sharpen your pencil every whip stitch because the pencil is actually too sharp. So what's nice about the handheld pencil sharpeners, it'll give you a stronger point. You may have to sharpen it a little bit more just because of dulling the point as you draw. But again, the relationship between the width and the height of the point is much more conducive for it not to break. So let me, okay, so now this is the 6B. Okay, 6B, and it really didn't take very much to get that. And again, I don't know if you can, well, let's get one more done and then I'll hold it up. And then we'll go to an 8B. Now this is the one that I live by because, well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. I always think about, 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6 things at the same time, and then I get off on tangents, and then sometimes I never get back to where I started. So I'm trying to say, all right, let's finish one thing at a time, and then we'll get to the next topic. So anyhow. Okay, so this is the 8B, and this one actually is soft enough that even with moderate pressure, it's going to maybe go down into the valleys a little bit more than the other ones, but I still have these tiny little specks. So this is an 8B. So we've gone from light gray to a very dark black in the range of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there are pencils that are in between each one of these steps. And then if you want to, you can actually get a 3, 4, up to a 6H. Now, when people used to do design and architectural drawings and everything with a pencil instead of CAD programs, design-wise, the hard leads were good for that because in most cases, if you think about, I meant to bring a template with me, but imagine having a circle template and you want that perfect circle and you draw it and that goes along, you have another, like a ruler and you draw a line. Well, in drafting and planning in graphic design, you want that line to be pretty much the same width from start to finish, and you want all the lines to have the same visual weight. So you don't want any of them darker or lighter than the other. And so that is within kind of the function of the very hard pencils. The very hard pencils can also be used for, light sketching, as long as you don't use too much pressure. But as far as I'm concerned, my personal preference is kind of in this range, the 4B to 6B. And if I were stranded and they said you can only get one pencil, I would go for the 8B. So I'll sharpen this again. Okay. So with an 8B, if I barely use any pressure, I can get a very light line. And it's very responsive to the type of energy or the way that I'm drawing. That energy in my strokes carries through because I'm using a soft graphite. Now, if I want to, as I'm drawing it, again, this is what I think is the beauty of a really soft lead, is that I do a lot of animal caricatures and my illustration, and so I want them to have kind of a volume to them. So if I would use like, if I can locate my, if I would kind of draw the same character and just say, okay, well, I'm going to just go for it. When I draw that, it's hard to get anything other than the consistent line. And there's sometimes that if I want it to be, a little more like kind of a graphic image in its visual look, then this may be the very pencil to use. So I can get it dark enough. I'm not going to be able to erase that. But, you know, if I don't make any mistakes, then I don't have to worry about that. All right, so so this is a very controlled line. It's a hard lead, and so it is making a consistently, yeah, the thickness is consistent, and you know, if I use a constant pressure, then the darkness of the line is the same throughout. But with an 8B, I can choose to put a little extra pressure on it if I want a dark line, and then I can lighten it up if I want. And so in going around his head here, if I use a little bit of pressure and then I put a little more pressure down and then let up on it, again, like light pressure, light line, more pressure, dark line, ease up on the pressure, then this gives it a more organic look. It kind of makes it look more like a sphere rather than a circle. So let's see. This one. All right, so yeah, if I would draw a circle, this is an F, which is a fairly hard pencil. I'm using the same pressure going around. You know, it's very controlled, it's very geometric, and it's almost like it's anonymous. It doesn't have very much character. But if I draw another circle and I start off kind of lightly and then I bear down, make it dark, and then make it light again and make it a little thicker. This almost kind of shimmers a little bit. So it'd be a lot easier to maybe add some value to this in order to kind of give the impression of a sphere. Whereas, you know, on this one, I might be more apt to kind of put in some cross-hatching with regular lines in order to give, you know, kind of like a half-toning simulation of what a sphere looks like. So it kind of depends on what kind of drawing you want to do. I mean, there are, I rented a studio out. I had a building in Philadelphia and I had some extra studio space. And I rented a studio space. This one guy that actually, you know, worked for the post office, and this was like maybe 35 years ago. So he was on the night shift and he'd come and stop by his studio to work on a drawing every night after work before he went home. And he used really hard pencils because he'd start at one corner up here and just complete a whole drawing as he went across of desert scenes. And so he just would sit there and very meticulously build up the most subtle value changes. I mean, it would drive me crazy, but his work was quite beautiful, but he needed the hard pencils in order to build up his drawings in that way, and a very distinctive quality. You know, obviously it was very photographic looking, but it was almost like machine made. It was so precise and didn't have his hand in it. Whereas, you know, I would be more apt to, you know, kind of think about, well, let's see, let's kind of draw a snake out in the desert, and then, you know, I would go for the goofy aspect of it with my soft pencil. So it's not necessarily that you have to do odd things with soft pencils, but in my case, that's usually what happens. But, you know, if I were to do a cactus or something as I'm making up out of my head, you know, the standard cartoon classic cactus here, as I work with it, I really like the idea that with a little more pressure, I can get dark accent lines. And then if I want to start shading that, then I can just light up a little bit with the pressure. And so for me, this is more characteristic of the work that I do than something that would be a little bit more precise. The drawing that you might have noticed when I first came on was a portrait that I did of my father, and it's a lot more photographic looking than I usually do. But, I've added little things in it, like his ballpoint pens and stuff are a little more animated with these kind of lines. It was more of like, when I was thinking about doing his shirt and his look, it's pretty, true to what I observed, but like for the pens that were in his pocket, I kind of, sketched them up originally as kind of geometric things, but then, that little part that sticks out, I kind of made that look a little bit more like a nose. And I could do that because I just changed the quality of the line. And then you can put like a little, this can become a mouth. So if you look closely at that drawing, you'll kind of see that there are a couple of little animation aspects that I added. And it's do quite a bit to the character of the line and the way that I'm applying the graphite. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the erasers, because in addition to using graphite as a additive thing, you can actually draw by removing it. So I'm going to build up a nice, okay, this is a vinyl eraser, and it's good for making really more dramatic changes. And so if I wanted to, I can just go ahead and just remove the graphite. So I can start drawing with the eraser. Now, this is a kneaded eraser. Most kneaded erasers are gray. That's the traditional color, but this is a red one. And they do exactly the same job, but I think this one's more fun. So I like having my red eraser. Now, kneaded erasers are made in companion with pencils and things. They're a little stickier. I mean, if you kind of feel them, they have like a little bit of a stick to it. And so you can do some very subtle things with this that all I have to do is just kind of with this soft graphite, I can start picking small amounts of graphite up. So if I want to kind of lighten a tone, you can see the way then it sticks to the eraser. And this is, obviously where to me, this is like magic. It's like, where does the graphite go? You go ahead and knead the eraser and it's like brand new again. These red erasers, after you knead them a little bit, look a little bit like bubble gum. All right, so if I want to, I can pick up even more, use maybe a little more pressure, but it's the stickiness of the eraser that kind of helps you be able to do some lighter tones. So that's starting to look, starting to have a volume to it. And if I want to, then I can kind of come back and maybe if I put just a little value on top of that and on top of that, that makes it look like that one stripe is overlapping the other one. And so that kind of brings up the topic of tones. So when you think about working on a drawing, contrast is always a good thing. And you can define edges with a change in contrasted tone. So let's say that I'm going to very lightly draw another one of my little pig friends here. Just do it very lightly. You don't always have to use line work in order to make something stand out. So if you want a darker tone, if you want a lighter tone, pick whatever grade of pencil you want to use to sharpen this. And so now what I'm going to do is start building up a consistent tone that just happens to stop right along the edge of my shape. So I'll kind of, and this could be an apple, it could be a still life material, it could be somebody's nose on a portrait. Okay, so if I put in the background with tone, whatever is left is the figure. And so I've been able to define that not with an outline, but with calling a contrast between the white in the shape of the figure background. So I'm going to build up even more. So this is when, if you want to make things pop a little bit, you can make the background even darker for a shadow. Can make it very dark and let it kind of come into the figure a little bit. So now that starts reading as a shadow. All right, I'm going to make the eyes a little darker. Okay, so then I can come back and start putting tone in some of the features, a little shading. And again, the contrast, if I have a light tone and I start putting a darker tone, then it's going to start to help define the form. Little nostrils here. So in this case, I'm not having a heavy reliance on line, but rather a variety of tones, and especially giving a contrast. Now, I could, if for that highlight on his back there, I could fill that up. And then again, as I mentioned about drawing, with your eraser, I can come back and put that highlight in by using a vinyl eraser. So it's really fun to play around with these things. If you're accustomed to always doing things without lines, try developing, just as a little exercise, try your hand. And then if you do need the line, you can put a couple lines in for emphasis. Okay. And then a little darker here. And the more contrast, the more the pop along that edge. So that's really going to come forward because in the background, it's a much darker tone. Okay. Now, so we've talked about the values and the different grades of the pencils in terms of hard to soft, use your eraser, the difference between a real consistent kind of graphic design line and something that has a little more kind of an organic feel to it. You can build things up as I've done here with kind of more of a real fast and loose cross-hatching. You can be much more meticulous by building up contrasts and value scales with the pencil. Now what I want to do and throw in the mix is water-soluble graphite. And so these come in mostly the B range. I think HB is about the hardest you'll come up with. But you can draw with these in the same way. So if you only had one type pencil to pick and you wanted one that is the most versatile, then perhaps you take a watercolor or a water soluble. But let's do a duck this time since we're talking about water. So you can see that it has the same, this is a 4B. It's not quite as juicy as the ones that I use with the 8B. But so I get a nice line here. Now, if I want to get some tone in there, I can go ahead and put that in. Same way that we did with the regular graphite pencils. Now this is when the magic comes. Okay, so we'll bring our water over here. And, you know, depending on whether big, small, whatever, you know, pick the appropriate brush. And as soon as I hit this with water, you can see that the lines are going to start to bleed. So I can start going from a line and move in and start getting tone to go with that. So what I do is kind of take the tip and then kind of go into the heel, and I kind of move it around a little bit like a watercolor wash. So that way you can have a nice line, and then from the very lines that you know, created your drawing with, then it also then becomes the tonality. And much the same, you know, the graphite concentration in a 4B is a little less than in an 8B. I'll get that one out in a minute, because you can get a graphite that is just jet black. So this really is a lot of fun to play with this. Okay, so let me get my 8B here, and we'll give him a real dark shadow on the ground. So, I mean, as you can see, just by the way it looks like, laying it down on the paper, it's darker than that 4B was. But then when I hit that with water, you can see it really is dark. It's like almost like India ink. So it kind of, it starts looking more like a wash drawing with linear elements, and that is a lot of fun to play with. You know, I could come back up here, add some to it. You know, if I want to put little darker shadows, so I can pick it up. And these are pigmented enough that with the graphite that you can get some dark tones just by using it almost like a watercolor palette. And then once it dries, I mean, at this point, you've wet the paper, so the fibers are a little bit vulnerable. So you don't want to go immediately and try to erase anything. This would be tough to erase anyhow, because it's really been soaked up by the paper. Now, what I like to do, these are, let me grab my 8B version of it. They also make a jumbo pencil. So this is the same lead. It's made exactly the same, but you can see that it is considerably bigger. And so what's nice about this is once you kind of get, I mean, you still can make really fine lines. You know, once you have a point on a pencil, it doesn't make it, you know, this thing could be huge. But as you start working with it and drawing with it, now I can get really thick lines because the pencil's bigger. So if you're working on a larger format, you might want to look at these. And you also can get, this for me is pure heaven. This is 100%, it's called a graphite crayon. And because this is so thick, it has such a structure because it's so thick compared to the thinness of a regular pencil lead. This is actually a 9B. So this is really soft. And it has also comes in different grades. But again, I like to wallow in the graphite. So I like the 8B grades of the pencil. And so you can imagine that, you know, if you're drawing on a smaller thing, you know, you kind of use wrist, and with a crayon, a graphite crayon, you're using, you know, your arm. You can get really kind of nice marks with that. But this is, you know, kind of appropriate for larger drawings. Now, the other bonus that you have with these, I did this ahead of time. I took a piece of tracing paper. You could take vellum, and I just put a real rich load of 9B graphic with my crayon here. And then, you know, if you have something, let's say that I'm doing a drawing here, and I've come up with talking about pigment, so we'll go back to the pigs. That seems more appropriate. Okay, so I've drawn this character, and now I want to transfer it to my better paper. You can use this as a transfer. So I put this down here, put my image on top of it, and in this case, I'll probably use, you know, like an HB, which is a you know, moderately soft or hard pencil. And with a little bit of pressure, again, I don't want to make so much pressure that I'm going to score or damage the surface underneath. But as I apply little pressure, the graphite acts like carbon paper. You don't want to use carbon paper to transfer drawings because it's very greasy. You can't erase it. It's nasty stuff. But if you make your own graphite transfer paper, then when I take that away, this is graphite. This is the same graphite that I use to draw with. And if there's something that I want to get rid of, I can erase this. Or if I look at it and I think, well, that's perfect for my guideline, but it's just a little bit strong. I don't want as much graphite. You can take your kneaded eraser, and then I can kind of press down on that, and I can reduce the graphite. So I just have enough of a line, enough graphite on the paper that I can see what I want to do. Now, I'm going to take a 6B pencil. Let's go ahead and use what I just did there. So I had decided, wow, I really like that. So I'll use that as a guide. I might be a little bit more fluid in drawing it so I get some characters of the energy of the way that I'm drawing this. Okay. Now, I'm going to take my 8B is a little extreme. I'm going to take one of my watercolor graphites. Let's go with the, where's my 4B? I can't find my 4B. There it is. Okay, I'm going to sharpen this again. Okay, so I sharpened this, and now I'm going to be kind of a little loosey-goosey here with, just going to kind of start adding some graphite, putting in some of the tones. All right, so now when I hit water, I'm going to, you know, I could be really fluid with it, and if I want to, I can get very exuberant with it, and I still have the original drawing underneath it. So I've used my, you know, like 6B pencil to go, like, now, first thing I did was I did a drawing, and I transferred on a tracing paper, used the graphite, traced it onto there, then drew it with my 6B. That graphite is not water soluble, but then I took my water soluble graphite and I put some marks in there, and so that as I am liberating the graphic with a water soluble pencil, the original drawing that I put in there with the standard graphite pencil is not changing. So if I want to be kind of very fluid with the way that I'm adding stuff, I still am maintaining the integrity of the original drawing. And then I don't necessarily want to go back into there while this is still wet, because that might damage the paper, but I could come over here and make like a little mini palette and pick out, you know, just kind of activate it and then just use it like water, like a wash or watercolor. So I can come back, and if I, you know, have some real dark areas, then I can come back with the 8B. But, you know, you can see the way that you can build this up. In fact, let's get started on this stuff, and I end up with everything everywhere. All right, so this is the 8B. come here with that. Pull that around, and then, you know, if I want a really dark background, I can do that. Now here's the culprit that left the message on that blank pad. And then, you know, you can kind of feather that out if you want. Or if you decide, you know, you don't like it, you can pick some of it up and spread it out. But again, that original line that you did is still going to hold up. And again, this is why I recommend having a heavier paper, because if you plan to do erasers and, you know, all this layering and playing around with water soluble, you want a paper that's going to hold up. So, you know, if you're using kind of like just copy inkjet paper, something like that, you're going to have frustrated because it's going to just kind of fall apart on you. Okay, how are we doing for time here? Okay, we got a little bit of time left. So if anybody has any questions, what I would recommend doing is, you know, get pencils, you know, get a good handheld sharpener, erasers, good paper, and just go at it and kind of decide what it is that you want to do. Again, most of the work that I do are these kind of cartoon characters that are representative of human traits. You know, they're up walking, they wear top hats, things like that. And I enjoy experimenting with that. And so sometimes the drawings are a little bit more finished, and sometimes it's just working in my sketchbook. But the pencils, and again, my preference is for the soft ones, because I kind of like the way that the energy of the strokes and the lines that you're doing transfer very nicely. So if I'm using a very, very light movement, I'm doing mostly wrist, there's kind of a nice line. And if I kind of bear down on it a little bit more and then start getting more than my wrist involved, then I go from light to dark and then taper to light again. And that has a real flow to it, and it has a lot of energy. And then if I want to, I could take a harder pencil. Where is my H? Well, here, HB, that's good enough. Right, so then if I want to, I could, maybe even do a little bit of kind of cross-hatching stuff that is a little bit more regular, so I can start playing the energy of these kind of lines up against this one. And then on top of it, then, you can come back and apply some watercolor along that edge. Water-soluble graphite. In this case, the line is pretty much, kind of disappearing. And so it's just the white contrast against the dark. Then I can take my brush, activate that. I can choose to, let it cool up, be real, excuse me, juicy up against the edge, and then I can start kind of feathering it out so it gets to be a lighter gray. Oh, this looks kind of like an elephant, so elephant trunk, so we'll kind of finish it off that way. And then once that dries, okay, this is dry enough over here. You can go back with a pencil, and then you can add some more tonality that's a little bit more controlled, perhaps. So you have that real nice, luscious wash underneath it, and now I'm kind of going back with building up a tonal range with the pencil, the regular graphite pencil. So I mean, just you got all sorts of options to play with. You can do a highly rendered, finished drawing built up with real gradual tones. You can do stuff that is a little bit more loose, kind of combining regular graphite with the water-soluble graphite. I mean, just so many things that you can play with and have a delightful time of it. Does anybody have any questions? Any thoughts? All right. Thing that's always amazes me, I'm so thankful for it, is that once I get going, I start really getting into drawings and, like this one, I'm not going to develop it so much, but then, this guy is a little bit intriguing. So, I might end up giving him a little top hat. He's going out on the town. And it's so easy for me to then get so fully engaged in the story about what's happening here and might add some more stuff. So it's all about what you want to do and having good materials to work with and essentially spending the time doing what you love doing.
Thanks, Franz. And just to remind everyone that was with us tonight, if you missed any of the steps along the way, or if you would like to watch this workshop at your own pace, this is being recorded. So if you go to michaels.com/classes, you can watch the full video of this at your own time using your own materials as well. Thank you, Franz.
Yes, you're welcome. Everybody go out and draw, get your graphite going, and have fun.